And welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Holland is being covered by Councillor Hutchison. I believe is stuck in traffic at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, item 2 then, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest that they need to make? No? Okay, thank you. Item 3 then, the minutes of the previous meeting. Has everybody had chance to look at those minutes, and does anybody have any issues in relation to them? Councillor Stubbs, Mike?
Happy to move them, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll take those as a true and accurate record then. Thank you. Okay, moving on then. Item 4 then, the audited statement of accounts for the year 2021-22. And we have Andrew Smith from Grant Thornton, who's going to run through those for us, if you wouldn't mind, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So our report, our audit financial report starts on, I think, page 95, 93 of the pack. And I'll start on page 95, which is the headlines page. The audit is now substantially complete. There are a couple of issues that we're still trying to resolve and finalise, mainly around the work that we've been doing around the valuation of the council's land and buildings, and also one query that we've got with the council's actuary in regards to the pension fund. But substantially, the audit is otherwise complete, and this report sets out the findings of the audit. In terms of issues, we are, in terms of headline opinion, we are intending to issue an unmodified opinion upon the financial statements. We have identified a very small number of issues as part of the audit, which are actually set out in Appendix C of the pack, which starts on page 117. Within there are some disclosure issues which we set out. Most of these have been adjusted for, and we're satisfied that the ones that haven't been adjusted for are minor and not material in nature. On page 119, we set out, sorry, on page 120, we set out the actual audit adjustments that we've identified as part of our audit work. One of them was to do with the completeness of expenditure. We found a couple of invoices that actually related to the year in question, 21-22, but no accrual had been made in the accounts for them. So that was an understatement of expenditure of £185,000. We also identified an issue as part of our investment property testing, where we found that the investment property had been overstated by a value of £94,000. Together, that would, taken together, those two adjustments would add up to a £279,000 change to the balance sheet value. That's substantially below our materiality levels, and therefore we are content that management don't need to adjust for these. We just need to report these to you as the audit committee. Other than that, we did identify some control issues as part of the audit. They're set out back on page 115 of the pack. A couple of those relate to kind of journal controls, one around user access rights, the other one's around authorisation. We've made a couple of recommendations for management to consider in terms of future years. And we also have raised a recommendation around cut-off procedures, because we did identify a number of disposals which weren't accounted for last year, which perhaps should have been, because that's when they were disposed upon. They didn't have a material bearing upon the accounts and have been corrected for, but there was obviously a timeliness issue around the accounting for those particular disposals. So hence why we've included that recommendation. They're the main kind of findings that have come out of the audit this year. Other than that, we have been satisfied with the results of our procedures, and not found any other issues that I feel that you need to be aware of. So on that note, I'm more than happy to take questions on anything I've just covered, or anything else that's in the pack that you want to query.
Thank you, Andrew. Do members have any questions? Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. To be fair, it's a mixture of the auditors and officers. So if I just go through, I've got several. Do you want me to do them all in one go? Yeah. Okay. No, I promise it's not that bad. On page 15 of the pack, there's a statement with regard to the £16.9 million that's been awarded via the town deal to Kidsgrove. The first bullet point says to drive growth and opportunity through an enhanced enterprise infrastructure in Kidsgrove. Chair, it's not in Kidsgrove, it's in Bradwell. So for the sake of accuracy, can that sentence be changed? I understand the argument about whether or not it's in Kidsgrove has been fought and won and lost, but that as a statement is untrue. It's not in Kidsgrove. The infrastructure isn't in Kidsgrove. It's in Bradwell. So can that be rewritten in any way that they want to do it? But that's not accurate at all. At the bottom of, sorry. Page 16 of the pack is the reconciliation of the comprehensive income and expenditure. Can the Section 5.1 officer give a little more detail as to what the movement in usable reserves is? Because somebody who hasn't got any sort of background in accountancy might not know what that actually is. Thank you, Chair. Table at the bottom of page 16 and the pack is page 8 of the report. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Stubbs. In note 9 of the statement of accounts, which is on page 59 in your pack, there's a full analysis of the movements in reserves there.
You have to.
Pardon?
There you go. Sorry. No, I understand that, and I can read that, and members of this committee can read this, but you know, members of my residents might not be able to read that. So I'm just asking for a 1 minute overview of what that table actually is.
Okay, so in note 9, in the 4th column, they are the details of all of the usable reserves that we have. Just to the right of that, where it states transfers out, that's money that we've actually spent out of those reserves. Transfers in is where we've contributed to those reserves, and then there's a net movement, which then ties back to the amount that you referred to on page 16. If you'd like a more detailed breakdown, I'm happy to provide that to you. Thanks.
Thank you. At the top of page 17 of the pack, and that's obviously page 9 of the agenda item, there is the capital expenditure review. Can one of the officers please provide the difference between the revised and the original capital programme and how that's actually split? So I think it changes from the 15.179 to the 19.552. Is there a table for that somewhere, and how that capital increase is and for what items it is for?
Yeah. This time last year to revise what capital expenditure we're making. As part of that, we were awarded, well, it takes account of the amounts that we were awarded from the town deals fund and the future high street fund. Again, I don't have full detail of all the ins and outs of all the individual capital projects, but again, if you'd like a breakdown of that, I can provide that to you after the meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, on the strategic risks part of the report. So that is page 13 of the report and page 21 of the pack. It talks about the general fund balance can be used to contribute to the revenue account. The required level, though, is determined by a risk assessment of factors which might adversely impact upon the revenue budget on a worst case basis. Can somebody explain to me some examples of what these risk factors might be?
So as part of, we're actually looking at our general fund balances and reserves. We look at all factors. So obviously the last couple of years, COVID has played a massive impact on that. We've looked at income levels, obviously, you know, sort of just as we went into the pandemic, we had to close all our leisure facilities, our car park income stopped. So that was that risk factor there increased massively for an income amount that we weren't getting in at that point. So we sort of score, we have a number of different risk factors across income, reserves, just our general day-to-day expenditure. And we look at whether global, national factors, our local factors as well, as to what's sort of happening that might fluctuate those them particular risk areas, and we apply a risk rating to those. So quite a bit of work's done on this every year to look at our reserves, and we are currently doing that now as part of our budget setting process for next year's budget. So we'll perhaps, when we come to sort of looking at 23-24's budget, we'll see some of those income risk factors coming down slightly because our income levels are going back up on our leisure centres, people are coming back into town on our car parks, etc. So we're constantly reviewing those all the time. And over the last sort of few years, you'll see our reserves that have increased slightly because of all these sort of unknowns that have happened to us, and we need to have a bit more money in the reserves for those. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to the audit report itself, first thing to say is congratulations to the team on page, I think it's page 4, the significant matters that the auditors didn't encounter any significant difficulties or identify any significant matters. So congratulations to the team. It's a really good piece of work. Chapter 3, though, so it's page 111 of the pack, page 19. It's the value for money procedures and conclusions. Obviously, we have not completed our value for money work. They're not in a position to do that. But it does say, though, that the chair of audit and standards received a letter. Now, I might have missed it. Was that letter shared with members of the audit committee?
Are you referring to the delay in the work being completed? To be perfectly honest with you, I can't remember exactly what date we received the letter, so it could have been between the previous meeting and this meeting. So as far as I'm aware, you've been informed now because this is the first opportunity that we've had, I think, since we were informed of it. Yeah, okay.
Okay, I think for reference, Chair, I think that might have come out by email when it happened, but you've got it.
Sorry.
Slight error here, Chair, on what Councillor Todd is referring to, page 113. There was a wrong date. It's got the 30th of January 2013.
Yeah. I don't think he's referring to that date.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah, I think most of us would probably guess that that's 2023, but just for the purpose of clarity. Yeah.
Can a copy of the letter that went to the chair of audit be supplied to everybody, just so we can see what the reasons why, because we don't know the reasons why it's been delayed. They I suspect, I'm 99% sure they are absolutely, real reasons, but we don't know what they are. So that's just a request.
I mean, the letter can be circulated, but do you want to just comment on that, Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just to explain the reasons, I'm more than happy for you to see the letter, but to be honest, it's a very strange sort of administration thing that the NEO require us to do. So at the moment, there is still a statutory deadline at the end of September. However, they have also issued guidance to say that what they expect is that the VFM work is completed within 3 months of the financial statements audit. So generally speaking, if we sign off this month, then typically we'd probably expect to deliver your report by the end of February. But there is a statutory requirement for us to write to the audit chair if we haven't delivered it by September. So the reasons are largely because it is taking us this long to get to the financial statements audit conclusion, and then we need a bit of additional time to do the VFM work. It's just a pure resourcing issue on our part, because we just can't simultaneously do both pieces of work at the same time. So that's the key reason here. Unfortunately, I say the law actually requires me to write to the audit chair if I don't do it by September.
Moving on to page 11, I think it's 110. I'll just double check. Sorry. It's basically to do with prior year recommendations and the testing with regard to directorships. Has basically the update on actions taken, has the council undertaken this completeness review of related parties? Because I'm not aware of that, if that's the case. And basically, the example it gives there is obviously one member that had got a potential conflict of interest with regards to a community centre, but there's also, I believe, 4 members that had got directorships that hadn't been declared on their statement. Just wondering if that's been picked up. I mean, it's probably difficult for the officers here tonight to pick that up, but can somebody let us know if that has been picked up?
Pick that up then. So as part of the last year recommendation, part of the external auditors recommendation was that we do actually look at Companies House as well, which we do that now. In respect of the 4 related party forms that you're referring to, yes, that has been picked up, that has been looked into, and there isn't any direct conflict of interest as such, because of, can't obviously talk too much into it, but we are satisfied that there's no risk area there at all in relation to those. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to page 118 of the pack, audit adjustments. Note 3 basically refers to, and I think, Andrew, you might have referred to this during your preamble, that the council have made a disclosure with regards to the estimation of net pension liability, and the audit team does not consider this to meet the definition of critical judgment. In that case, the council have decided, by the look of it, to continue with the figure they're using. How is that dealt with from an audit point of view? Because if you're recommending that needs to be changed, but the council's choosing not to, how does that circle get squared?
So this point really kind of just relates to, without boring you with too much kind of technical detail, there's obviously the SITFA code, and the SITFA code has requirements around disclosure of things called critical judgments that are made within the accounts. Our issue with this particular one was that it's not a critical judgment. It is an area of estimation, and disclosures are required about that. And essentially, we feel that this disclosure does the job of that. It's just been wrongly badged, essentially, as a critical judgment. So it's not a major issue. The fact that it's not been changed, I'd say it's a relatively minor. disclosure point, but what we are required to do is just report any kind of areas of what we feel are non-compliance with the SITFA code, which we think this is, but I wouldn't describe it as a minor. I would describe it as a minor issue. So it's not an issue that no change has been made in respect to this one. Essentially, it's wrong badging, essentially.
Thank you. Moving on to page 122, the fees. Obviously, the council audit proposed and final tally, agree. The certification of housing benefit claim, it's 18,000 proposed fee, but work is yet to be completed to agree the final fee. I know it's very difficult for you to say, oh, it's going to be exactly the same, but can we be assured that that figure is not going to raise by, you know, several percent, that it's going to be in the ballpark?
So that work typically starts around about December, January time. So it's not started yet. The fee will really only change if we have to do additional work. We'll only have to do additional work if there's errors in the housing benefit subsidy claim that the council has prepared. So obviously, if there are errors which then therefore require additional testing, because every time you find an error, you have to then do what they call 40+ testing. So you have to pick another sample of 40. So obviously, if every single one of them, we would have to charge you additional, because that isn't built into this fee. So assuming there are no errors, the fee will be £18,000. There will be no change. Obviously, if there are errors, then clearly the fees will go up accordingly.
Thank you. I assure the chair I've nearly finished. In fact, this is the last one on this one. Moving to page 125, it's the letter from the council to the auditors. Given the conversation we just had with regard to the slight discrepancy using the SITFA code, is it right that we can write a letter that basically says that we have followed the international financial reporting standards and followed the SITFA code of practice on local authorities, when strictly speaking we haven't?
I'm still comfortable with the statement that management are proposing there. I say it's a relatively minor issue. There will always be minor issues whenever we do an audit around the SITFA code. That statement is really about, has there been material compliance with the SITFA code, and I'm happy to report that based on the audit that is the case.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Can I
Thanks,
add
Matt.
something on that, if you
Sure.
don't mind?
Go on, Craig.
I think this is us over disclosing rather than not complying. So we're complying with the code and then a bit more, doing a bit more than we have to.
So essentially what we're saying is that we've described something as a critical judgment, although we didn't need to really describe it as anything. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Joan.
Can I just make the comment that presumably figures have to be, in certain areas, like you just suggested, have to be put in there with a proviso that they might change because of the date requirement of the audit being completed?
Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, there are a couple of areas where we're still finalising the work around the valuation of the council's land and buildings, and also the valuation of the pension liability. I don't envisage that the pension liability would change in any way as a result of the outstanding work. In terms of the valuation, we are still trying to get some additional evidence from the council's valuer to support the valuation that they've prepared. It's probably hard to say at this point in time that wouldn't lead to additional changes until the work is finalised, but hopefully it won't be the case that there are any more adjustments.
And presumably if you waited for that length of time, you'd be out of the audit time anyway, so you've got to put
we need to get we can't sign off until we've got all the evidence we need.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I could just say that evidence has been returned today. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Do we have any other questions in relation to the audit and the statement of accounts? No? Well, it's good to have a discussion, and it's nice that somebody's actually asked questions about things, because so often we have no questions. So thanks, Mike.
Paul, shall I say something?
Sorry, go on, Steve.
No, thanks for that, Mike. I see this. I think this is as good an audit as we're we're ever likely to get. And I congratulate all the team for the work they've done. That was all. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I think I'd reiterate that. I mean, audits, you know, can vary, and in recent years, the results we've had have been excellent, and that's down to the team and obviously the cooperation and assistance from the auditors. So thank you to everybody who's involved in it. Okay, so we have to receive and approve the accounts, notwithstanding the one point that Mike hasn't had an answer on in relation to page 15. Are we happy to approve the accounts as they stand? Could we have a vote on that, please? Yep. Okay, thank you. So we can record that the accounts have been approved, and we've received both the accounts and the audit finding reports. So thank you. Moving on then to the Treasury Management half-yearly report, and Craig's going to go through that for us. So whenever you're ready, Craig.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair. SIPF's Treasury Management Code of Practice recommends that members should be informed of the Council's Treasury Management activities at least twice per year. This half-yearly report to members is intended to provide an update of the Treasury Management strategy and our performance for the first 6 months of the financial year against that strategy. As I'm sure you're all aware from watching the news, in efforts to control inflation, interest rates have been increased by the Bank of England. Increased interest rates and the receipt of the Town Deals and Future High Streets Fund grants have resulted in a higher than expected return on our investment portfolio during the first 6 months of the year. And it's also negated the need for the council to undertake any borrowing. The vast majority of our investments have been undertaken with the Government's Debt Management Office, and this ensures the security of the council's funds. Interest that we've received for the first 6 months of the year amounts to £117,000. All treasury management activity that we've undertaken has been done so in compliance with the strategy and the prudential indicators that are contained within the strategy. And there's no intention or need for you to revise any of the indicators for the remainder of the year. If you've got any questions at all on the reports, then I'm more than happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Mike, any questions?
I miss the days of Iceland. That's all I'm going to say, basically.
We had a conversation about that before the meeting, actually. So, do we have any questions from anybody in relation to this? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Craig. And we'll note that that report has been received by the committee, and we'll move on to item number 6, which is the internal audit update for Q2. And Claire's going to go through that for us whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the internal audit activities Q2. So it covers the period 1st of July till the end of September 2022. So on page 142 at the top of the table, first table there, you've got the audits that have been undertaken during the quarter. So we had a satisfactory positive assurance on the risk management review that we did. We also did a piece of consultancy work, which was looking at an overpayment that had happened in the housing benefit and council tax team. That was a piece of work just to make sure that the council's procedures had been followed in that instance. And as you can see, we only made one low recommendation there. So the majority of the things that the council should have been doing were being done. The reason we don't issue an opinion when we do a consultancy work is because we're not looking at the end-to-end of a system. So that's why we can't provide that assurance for that type of work. Then the other two audits that we did during the quarter received marginal opinions, and that's our sort of middle ground neutral opinion. So there is a number of improvements that need to happen within those services. So the first one, planning enforcement, there were 13 recommendations made as part of that audit, and the areas of improvement that were identified were management of caseloads, processing of complaints, and monitoring performance. And then for the trade waste review, we made 9 recommendations as part of that audit. And the key areas for improvement were around financial and budgetary framework and management and the maintenance of stock records. And at paragraph 2.3 and table 2 there, you've got the different levels of definitions and assurance for each piece of audit work that we do. So, and then further below that, table 3 highlights all the work that was still in progress at the end of quarter 2. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of work in progress, and we'll anticipate that we'll bring the majority of those forward in quarter 3 with the results of that work. Further down the same page, recommendations implemented. So when we've completed a piece of audit work and we issue recommendations and actions for improvement, we do track each of those with the service manager to make sure that those are implemented. So as at the end of September, we'd issued 325 recommendations and 274 of those have been implemented, which is 84% against a target we want to get to 96 at the end of the financial year. So there's more details on that in the appendix, which is on page 147. So that shows that there's 51 recommendations that have not yet been completed. 26 of those are not yet due. So basically we've only just finished the audit. So the actions haven't yet overrun their target completion date. And then we do have a number of recommendations that are overdue for implementation, which you can see to the right side of the table there. So we do provide a list of each individual overdue recommendation to the executive management team on a quarterly basis. And we are going to be doing some further work over the next quarter just to try and bring those, work with service managers and try and bring those overdue recommendations down. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Do we have any questions from members? Mike?
Just it's the obvious question, really, Chair. There's 2 items that have of a high risk overdue for implementation within chief executives. Can we know what they are?
Yeah, the first one relates to the IT governance audit, and I think it is one that we discussed at previous meetings around identifying a chief information officer and a chief information security officer. Sorry, get your teeth in. Yeah, so I think we discussed that at a previous meeting. I think just due to staff moving around at the minute, there's nobody been identified for those roles, and it is something that we say we will pick up. Sorry, I haven't gone any further update than that on that one. And the second one was in relation to the GDPR audit that we did. So data protection audit, and that was in relation to training for all staff. So progress has been made on that one, and the training is now available. We procured training. It's just a case of staff now need to complete that training. So yeah, that one's in progress, and have to bring an update on the other one to the next committee. I'll get an update. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do members have any further questions in relation to the internal audit report? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Claire. Moving on then, we'll go on to the committee work plan. Page 149 of your pack. We have an item to add to that, which is the external review of the internal audit. At the moment, in internal audit, Claire's department's undergoing an external review, so we'll have a report, with all being well, for the next meeting in relation to that, so we can then have a look at that. The other item that we don't currently have, that we were originally going to include on this meeting, was the more detailed analysis of the risk report. And I think that the way that we've had the information presented to us in recent meetings isn't necessarily that beneficial to members. I think that we need something that's perhaps a more down-to-earth descriptive analysis of the work that's being done, because it just seems to me that it's too high level, and we're looking at reports that are basically the detailed reports that added together to form a final report. And I don't think that it's actually that beneficial for us to sit and look at all the reports that go into it without somebody explaining in much more detail what it is that they're actually looking at. So before we go to the next meeting anyway, when we look at the more detailed analysis, what we'll do is we'll do a bit more work on that and see that we can present them in a more user-friendly manner that should help everybody to understand them a little bit better than we currently do. Now, that might just be me being thick, but I'm sure that other people are sharing the same difficulties as I do. So we'll be looking at that, and obviously the external review. Does anybody have anything else that they feel needs to be added into this, Joan?
As far as the risk assessment is concerned, it's for lay people who are not used to reading loads of reports and doing a quick analysis for themselves. It would be quite easy to adopt the traffic light system of red, amber and green to make it quite visual and to see where they fit in.
I think
It's
we
a
used to
very
use something similar to that.
It's a very simple process, and you can see at the drop of a hat where the hotspots are. It's just an idea, you know, to make it more
The
visual.
complication we have is that we use a specific system that generates these reports. And what I'm looking for is something that enables the members to interpret the reports more easily. I don't think that we can go back to the traffic light system as such, because we've moved away from that for what one must assume are very good reasons. And so we've got a system that's perhaps more complex, but the officers with their much greater understanding of how it works will know exactly what they're doing with this. But as laymen, when we come to read these reports, we don't necessarily understand the exact details of how they're working. And so I think the idea originally behind us looking at the reports in more detail was so that we got a greater understanding of how the officers arrived at the risk assessments for different areas of risk. And I just feel that the information that we're getting back when we examine the detail isn't really doing its job. It's not really helping us in any great way. And so what we want to do is try and improve that so that when we do get the detail, instead of us sitting here and keeping quiet because we don't understand, we actually understand in a much better way what's going on. So that's what we're sort of aiming for. Go on, Joan.
You almost need the two systems together, the detailed reports for the backfill, but a much simpler version so that people can see at a glance what they want to look at more specifically.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to look at it anyway to see if we can improve it. Okay. Does anybody have any other comments or questions?
Just briefly, as my colleague Councillor Wilden was saying over there, the diagram thing is one thing, but I'm thinking that a lot of the not confusion, but the if you like, the lack of clarity to ordinary people in these reports is just linguistic. It's the language that's used, and you can't really change the language and maintain the precision. And this is the worry. I mean, as pretty much a layperson in financial terms myself, I want to know about risk. I see the word risk and, you know, little red lights go on. I see the word, you know, words like management and moving money and these kinds of things in very prosaic terms, because I'm not an accountant and don't pretend to be, and no amount of working parties could make me into one. But my public and my residents obviously will want to know from me when they come and ask things about money and where's it going and so forth and what's being done with it. They want something a little bit more than than a pie chart or something. They want something that takes the language in here into language which maintains the precision and the detail. It's almost an impossible task, but other firms treating this as a business, other businesses manage to do this because they're often speaking to lay shareholders. Is there a working party plan for this? You know, to actually not translate, that's the wrong word, but to adapt the language so that when we come into the meeting, rather than sit there being a bit bemused, we've got something to bite on and gnaw at.
Well, if I can just take you back a couple of years to when we started looking at this in more detail. The idea was that we would look at different risk areas each meeting so that we could gain a greater understanding. And I think that the issue we have is that we look at the things in more detail, but you hit the nail on the head. The problem is the language that's used. The more detailed reports that we're looking at that go to make it up. So the language in them is exactly the same as it is on the final report. So we're in danger of just simply looking at the additional reports that go to make up the final report, but not being any further forward. So the idea is that, I mean, we haven't looked at having a working party in relation to it. I think what we'll do is between now and the next meeting, we'll have a look at it and see if we think that we need to set up a working party. But we are at a point where we have reports that, as you say, have to be complex in their descriptions, but they aren't necessarily easy for anybody to understand. And it's that transition between having a complex report that uses a lot of terminology and going from that to something that we can say, right, I understand that now. And I don't think that we've reached that point. So it is something that we want to look at. And I think that maybe we will need to have a working party, and we can look at that as part of our work in the intervening period. So we'll have further discussion on it at the next meeting. And I think probably what we can do is, if we look at what we've achieved or failed to achieve at the next meeting, when we look in more depth at the risks we're looking at, let's see what we come up with, and then on the basis of that, decide how we need to go forward. Is that all right?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just, I gathered from what our speaker was saying, that you want more than just a glossary of terms. You want an explanation of professional terms. Is that the sort of thing we're on?
It's not just a glossary or an explanation of terms. We need to understand the thinking behind the process. So instead of us being given a detailed report and then the background, if you like, the breakdown of where that report came from in exactly the same terminology, we need somebody to actually explain the thinking behind it and the thought processes that go into the actual report that's been produced for us, so that we can have like an overview of it that is in very simple terms, so that we can understand it. If you read the reports, if you take the time to go through the things line by line, you can figure it out, but it doesn't. You're understanding what's actually being done, but you're not necessarily understanding the whole sort of area. And I think that the idea was several years ago, when we went into this, that we would look in more depth at certain areas. And so each meeting, we would pick a couple of areas to look at. And so what's happened is that in the intervening period, we now get more detailed reports and the background reports that go into it. But when it's not helping us, because it doesn't give us any more user-friendly information than we're getting from the summary report. So I don't think that we're actually any further forward. And I think what we need to try and do is come up with some process that enables us to look at it in a much more simplistic way, and something in a way that is easier for the layman to understand. So that if somebody says, well, what's that about? We don't pick up the report and start reading from it. We actually say, oh, well, it's to do with this or it's to do with that. And I think that's where we're falling down. Okay.
I think the main reason that we need less opacity in it is so people don't get away with stuff. I mean, I'm not suggesting that our colleagues here get away with stuff, but clearly it's a big authority. The whole notion of it is inevitably complex. But we're here, if you like, as the conscience and the public to look at it and to, I don't know, to decode what's there and to bring it down to, you know, is it honest? Is it truthful? Is it necessary? And the usual things that apply to any form of business. And we can't do that if we're faced with a lot of opaque figures. And I think if you're not a financial expert, as I've said, I'm not, your confidence is diminished when you feel you can't speak up and you can't challenge something there. We need to have the language of challenge in order to, you know, be a lot more forensic about how we challenge. You know, fair play to Mike, he can do it. I mean, I can't do it, but I like to do it.
Yeah, I certainly take your point. I'm not quite sure that we've got things hidden everywhere, but you know, I do agree with you to a degree, because of course, if people don't understand what they're reading, then how can they possibly challenge it? So, you know, I mean, and that's the whole point of it. We have people here to explain all sorts of other items on the agenda, and we're able to ask them questions about things. And I think that this is one area that is perhaps more difficult for people to understand. And so, you know, the aim is to simplify it in such a way that we are able to challenge it much better. So yes, thank you for that. Finally, Joan.
I'm sorry. It's just that I think you need the detail for those who do understand it. And also, if you start trying to oversimplify the wordage, you then lose the essence of the understanding and the transparency. And I think that's really important. And I know probably you've tried the traffic light system, but I actually use that as a risk manager for HSBC in Hong Kong, and they still use it. So if it's good enough for them, I would have thought it worth looking at again to run the two parallels so that you've got the detail for those finance wizards, of which I am not one, to have the detail, and also the ease of picking out the hotspots for people to look at. If you've got a grid of risk management, you've got the red, you've got the amber, you've got the green. The bits that people like us want to look at are the red hotspots. We know the others are relatively okay, and we could look in detail at those that are throwing up sort of red flags. And that would be the area where we would concentrate and be able to discuss. The others are being dealt with in less urgent ways because they're surviving a thorough audit. I just think it's something worth considering.
Yeah.
I'm not precious about it.
Yeah, the traffic light report obviously is more visually simple, but if we've got a 9 on the risk register, that's a red. So it's I mean, we need more discussion on this, and I think we need to discuss it with the risk management people. As I said before, I think what we need. Yes, go on.
Comments. Just having listened to what everyone's said this evening, I think I'm conscious about us having two different systems running alongside each other, because that will dilute the key information that we hold in our risk management system, which is called GRACE. The reports that GRACE produce have a heat map on, and they've got the red, amber, green, and it says high risk, low risk. It says what assessment it is, what the target is, but I appreciate that they're not always really clear, and maybe we just need a simplified text box on that sheet somewhere to say, you know, this is where we're aiming to get at, this is where we haven't been able to get at it because of X, Y, and Z. It could be something to do with what's national factors or anything, but just to simplify why we haven't been able to get there and what we are working on to get there. I'll make it easier for you to read those reports rather than it just being a report that gets spat out of a system and, you know, brought to you.
Well, Chair, I think that would help enormously.
Okay, well, that could be one of the things that we look at anyway. All right. Okay, if there are no further comments on that, then I've not been informed of any urgent business. So thank you, everybody, for your attendance and your contributions, and we'll close the meeting.